Good morning and welcome to McGregor Podcast, special edition Facebook Live. And today is April 1st, 2021. My name is Pastor Mark, and it is my privilege to welcome you this morning to really I hope will be an informative and encouraging time as we gather together and talk about what I'm super excited about is our new McGregor Podcast ministry. And we were sitting around the other day and just reflecting that 6 or 7 months ago, if you'd have told us that we were going to be early in 2021 launching 3, really 4 podcast shows at the same time, basically, we'd say, yeah, you're crazy. There's no way. But a lot has happened in the last 6 months, and we are very excited about being able this week to launch 3 of those 4 podcast shows. And the first one was our very special Passion Week series, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. So it takes a lot to get these podcasts up and running. A lot of folks, a lot of things happening. And I want to just say a big thank you to a couple guys. We're going to talk with one in just a minute, but Jeff Eskridge and Christian Miller, who have worked really hard to make sure that the technical end and the creative side and the look and the feel and all those things that go into making a podcast, and so appreciative of all that they have done to get us where we are today. Now, for you, those of you that are watching, and I know if you're watching, you're probably going to be one of the podcast listeners, and maybe you've already been listening to some of the podcasts. I know I am a huge consumer of podcasts. I have been a podcast listener to different podcasts for probably about 13 or 14 years. I was on the early end, and some of you maybe even remember that David Miller and myself had a podcast back about 12 years ago, somewhere around 2008, 7, 8. We did it for 2 years. It's called The Mark and Miller Show. And maybe we were a little ahead of our time. We had a lot of fun doing that. But now, as a church, we're back providing podcasts. But back to you. If you are a podcast listener, consumer, I'm curious to know, and I've had conversations with Christian and Jeff and other people about that, but how do you listen to your podcast? And so to make this a little more interactive on our Facebook Live, go ahead and put in the comments, and I'll be looking at those in just a minute. But go ahead and put in there, how do you listen to podcasts? Is it, do you use Spotify? Do you use the Apple Podcast player? Maybe you just go right to the website and just click on play and listen to it on the McGregorPodcast.com website. Maybe there's another podcast player. I personally like one called Overcast. I've been using that for years. Love that. Unfortunately, it's having a little problem connecting up with the McGregor podcast, at least all of them. So I'm having to switch over and use the Apple Podcast player. Got my wife set up. She's now listening to a podcast really for the first time this week, and super excited about that. And maybe you're a brand new podcast listener too. Maybe you can put that in the comments as well. But love to know if what podcast players that you're using to consume podcasts, especially the ones that we're now producing. And also, go ahead and I'd be curious to know how many of you have been listening to the Passion Week special podcast that we have produced this week. We have had one released every day so far this week. It started on Monday with Pastor Russell, looking at the biblical text on things that we can take what happened on that Monday of Holy Week, and then Tuesday, and then Wednesday. And by the way, if you've been listening, we got to Wednesday and scriptures are silent, but Pastor Russell figured out a way. I won't spoil it. And then today we looked at the betrayal. And man, I have really enjoyed these. They're pretty short. They're 7, 8, maybe 9 minutes long at the longest. Wonderful to do together as a family, if you'd like to do that, or just for me, it's on my drive into work, just listening to podcasts and being able to have that. These would also could be part of a devotional time as well, kind of setting the stage for scripture passages that you may be reading. So again, if you have a chance, put in the comments. Dawn puts in there that she's a new podcast listener. And by the way, if you're having trouble figuring out how to get your podcast where they need to go to listen to it, or maybe it's really new, I have a feeling maybe somebody here could help you. I'd even be glad to try to help you as well. I've done that for my wife now, but you probably know somebody that's, if you're struggling, find somebody that likes podcasts, and they would probably be willing to help you as well. So let me talk through some of the podcasts that we have. I mentioned the special ones first, the Passion Week special. Those are going to run all the way through till Saturday, and those get released early each morning. So we have Monday through Saturday of this week. And that's just a special edition podcast that we're doing that Pastor Russell is doing for us. But we're going to have regular content on these 3 channels that we have. We have the McGregor Podcast channel, and on, let me make sure I go in the right order, because I need to make sure let me start with the Talk Truth channel first. The Talk Truth channel is a podcast that is hosted by Chloe Weimer. And if you don't know Chloe, you'll want to tune in and get to know her. Chloe is a Bible teacher at SFCA, our school here at McGregor. And this is her 2nd year teaching there. And she had already started this podcast earlier. And when we began to look at developing podcast here, we thought, man, let's just bring over what she's already doing. She's doing a wonderful job. Bring her into this and allow her to be a part of it. And so now Chloe is part of our podcast ministry here and does an excellent job as she looks at biblical questions or biblical topics. And the one that was released this morning is a part 1 of a 2-part series entitled Family Worship. And I had a chance to listen to that also this morning, and so good. She has Ryan Flint, our minister of worship, as her guest, and they're talking about family worship. And it's like listening to a conversation as they discuss what family worship is, and both from a theological perspective, but also a very practical perspective on how you can do family worship as a family. And so again, I would encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to listen to that podcast, to subscribe and listen to that. And by the way, all these podcasts, if you're using a podcast player, you can subscribe to those. And I would encourage you to do that, because what that does is it enables each new podcast, as soon as it's released, it's going to be put into your podcast player. And if you have notifications set, you're going to get a little notification saying, Talk Truth just released a new episode. And like, oh, good, I know it's there. Because you might forget. When's it come out? I don't know. I can't remember what day. You'll be reminded with that notification. And even if you forget, when you go back to look at podcast in your podcast player, you'll see any of those new ones will be in the new section of your podcast player. So make sure you subscribe. But I would encourage you to definitely check out Chloe's Talk Truth, a really, really, really good podcast. Another podcast that we have is one that I have the privilege of hosting, and it's called Here at Home. And it's a podcast where we'll sit down with different people here at McGregor, and we'll get to hear their stories. We'll get to talk about their ministry, and mostly we'll get to hear about their love of Jesus and how that impacts their life. And I am so enjoying this podcast because I love hearing people's stories. And if you're like me, you probably love hearing a good story too. And so we'll have a chance to hear different people's stories. The very first one that released today, I had Wade Harmon on as our very first guest, and we talked about missions in the COVID era. And how do you do missions? How has that impacted our church as it relates to doing long-term mission or short-term mission projects where we send teams to different places literally all around the world? And obviously last year it impacted it greatly. But I have a chance to sit down and talk with Wade about missions and how that works now that we're in this. It's a different world, right? It's very different. 2021 is not like 2019, like we kind of thought it would be, but we can still get the gospel out. And what's that going to look like? And so tune in to the Here at Home podcast. I would encourage you to subscribe. Got a lot of good topics coming up in the weeks to come, and some great guests that I know you're going to enjoy. So that's the second one. So we have Talk Truth, Here at Home. And then a new one that's part of the McGregor Podcast channel is called Beyond the Notes. Super excited about this. This is a great idea, because here's what Beyond the Notes is. It is an opportunity for whoever has preached on Sunday to then on Monday come in and record a podcast and be able to share things that they did not or were not able to get to, or wanted to elaborate more, but because of just the time constraints that we have, to be able to share a little bit more than what we heard on Sunday morning. And being a part of that preaching schedule, preaching rotation, I know that there are always a lot of things that come up that are really good, but you're like, no, it either just doesn't fit quite right, or it's just the time. And so there will be no time limit on that podcast. I'm curious to know how long some of those will go. We'll start those next week, when you'll have a chance to have Pastor Russell coming in, sitting down, doing what I'm doing, and recording a podcast when we're calling Beyond the Notes. So I would encourage you to subscribe to that as well. I think that's going to be a really, really fun one. It's going to have a kind of a very much in the moment feel, especially if you listen to it pretty quickly. You've heard the service on Sunday, and that podcast will go out a day or two later, and you'll have a chance to continue the conversation, so to speak, from that message on Sunday morning. So that's the Beyond the Notes. And also, the Beyond the Notes is part of the McGregor Podcast. And just as a point, you might know this, but just to make sure, there's this fourth, program, and that's just our Sunday morning sermons. Just the sermon will be part of our podcast channel, the McGregor Podcast. And those are great because you might, as you're listening to the message on Sunday morning, live, either online or in person, and go, man, I would love for someone to hear this message. Now you have an opportunity to share that podcast with somebody, and they can listen to that message. Especially if they're podcast listeners already, it's really easy to share that. Or maybe you missed the message and you want to hear it. Or like me, sometimes hearing it the second time really helps a lot. And so you might want to listen to the message. You might go, why would I want to listen to the sermon twice? I'm surprised how much more I hear and retain when I hear that same message a second time. So that's really our fourth podcast show that we have of 3 channels: the McGregor Podcast, which has the sermon and the Beyond the Notes; Here at Home channel, which has the Here at Home podcast; and the Talk Truth channel, which has the Talk Truth podcast. All right, let's see. You guys aren't very interactive this morning, are you? You just want to listen, right? You don't want to tell me what podcast player you use, or if you've been listening to that. All right. Well, I want to introduce my man Christian Miller, who is I will call him the creator and the executive producer of all of our podcasts that we do here at McGregor. Christian, welcome to this special edition of the Podcast Ministry Facebook Live.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
I am here. I'm awake.
You said you were a little tired.
I am a little tired.
Were you out late last night?
Just a little.
All right.
Just a little.
Well, you're young. You can do those things. What were you doing, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I went to Pop Stroke with the college ministry last night, so it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Was that your first time to?
Well, as a guest, it was my first time.
Okay. Did you win? Or you had the best score?
Oh no.
Who had the best score? Was there like a competition at all, or was it just for fun?
My friend Alex won. So.
Oh, okay. Alex Fuller?
Yeah, Alex Fuller.
I know Alex. Mm-hmm. All right. Congratulations, Alex.
Yeah.
If you were watching, get a little shout out right now. Yeah, but I bet he's not.
Probably not.
Don says, good morning, Christian.
Well, good morning, Don.
Very grateful for Don because she is interacting with us. And I don't know how many people are actually watching us live, but grateful that Don. Am I missing any comments? Because sometimes my...
I don't think so.
Okay. Christian, give us a little bit of talk about the Beyond the Notes, because I know that was your idea. Kind of, where did that come from?
Yeah. Well, when I was thinking about what we could do podcast wise, I was thinking, I was under the understanding that like there's so much that like you guys as a teaching team like go through on a Sunday morning, and I know for Pastor Russell, he doesn't have all the time in the world. I mean, he only has like 33 minutes, right? 30 minutes. Okay.
But he'll take whatever he
gets. Yeah. I mean, that's not a lot of time.
No, it's not.
So being able to have a platform for you guys to be able to like go beyond what you have in your outline is definitely something I was looking forward to.
That was a great idea. Yeah. Great idea. What's been the biggest challenge that we've faced or you faced getting the podcast ministry up and running?
Probably the whole like organization of it, which I had nothing to do with. My boss, Jeff, did. He literally made this awesome like spreadsheet of every episode, when it's dropping, and who's on it, what's the title of it, and also like he even has it so where it's like the social schedule of like when that drops, like out socially, when, so in that sense, I mean, that was a lot of work, and also just editing everything. So that was a lot.
Well, I appreciate all you're doing, Christian. Yeah. And Christian has only been on staff here since January 1.
Yes.
So the fact that this is April 1st, so 3 months in, and we're launching all these podcasts, and there are a lot of other things you're doing as well. So, so glad to have you a part. I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of announcements, because this is Passion Week, and it's a very special week for believers around the world, and we look forward to Sunday. But before Sunday, we have our special upper room service tonight at 6:30 right here in the worship center. And I hope that you're planning on being there. Now, you might be watching this after April 1st, so if that's the case, then obviously you won't be able to make the upper room service. But if you're watching this before 6:30 tonight on April 1st, I hope that you're able to be here in person for our upper room service. We'll be celebrating the Lord's Supper together. We'll be setting our hearts and our minds on the cross and the sacrifice that our Savior made for us on Friday. And so it's become a tradition here. I know a lot of churches have a special Good Friday service. Several years ago, we pivoted, and we're doing the upper room service on Thursday, where we celebrate the Lord's Supper together, and in some ways began our focus on Good Friday as well. But then that leads us to Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, Easter, and we will be gathering together here on our campus at 8, 9:30, and 11, and I hope that you'll be able to be here in person. And there's something a little bit, Easter's always special, but not being able to gather last year. I talked to people that were 70, 80, 90 years old and asked them, have you ever had an Easter where you weren't able to meet as a church? And nobody. That was new. And that was hard, but it was 2020, and there was a lot of things that were very different for all of us. But this year we'll be able to gather, and it still looks a little bit different than what it did in 2019 when we gathered for Easter, but I can't wait. I cannot wait to be together with the body of Christ and worship together for Easter. And so I hope that you'll be able to be here. I know some of you might not be able to make it in person, and you can watch online, but I am so looking forward to Easter. We produced a little Easter invite that I want to end with. And again, thank you for joining us for this special McGregor Podcast Facebook Live edition. And again, thank you for tuning in and watching this, and look forward to seeing you Thursday for the upper room service, 6:30, or Easter, 8, 9:30, and 11. God bless you.
It's a given that the past year has been a rough year for all of us.
Mom! Here you go, Mom.
Thank you.
Our McGregor church family is here for you and your family. We have ministries from birth to adults that want to meet you and help you in your spiritual growth. And while many things in everyday life may have changed, God's faithful love does not change, and neither does our love for you. There's no place like McGregor Baptist Church to celebrate Easter Sunday and worship and Bible study this Easter season. We can't wait to meet you in one of our in-person services. If you are medically prohibited, feel free to watch online on our Facebook channel or at mcgregor.net/live. So we invite you to bring your family to meet our church family on Sunday, April 4th at one of our worship services at 8, 9:30, or 11 a.m. We hope to see you there.